Well, thank you, Carrie. This is a privilege for me to be able to introduce our speaker today. I'm Ann Ellison. I'm with Interfaith Health, part of the community advancement team for M Health Fairview, and partner in the planning and execution of the Speeding Hope series. We're glad to have you with us. Our speaker today, Elizabeth Power, is an internationally respected authority on creating trauma responsive living, including community-based healing. She's adjunct instructor in psychiatry at Georgetown University Medical Center, where she teaches trauma-informed medical care. The Nashville-based visionary, and I don't use that term lightly, is also the founder of the Trauma-Informed Academy, a hybrid learning experience that is grounded in trauma-informed emotional intelligence. I have come to know Elizabeth, fortunately for me, as a wickedly smart, funny, kind, and caring expert in everything from trauma, hope, and healing to gardening, music, and friendship. It is my sincere pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Power. The floor is yours.
Oh, you're going to make me cry. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. Now, everybody knows by the time I open my mouth and say three things that I am not from there. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm a child of the South, and I absolutely love being in Minnesota with Ann and all of her peeps and hanging out, and I'm just honored to be here. So today I figure everyone, whether you are urban or rural, you probably have enough angst in your life that I don't need to show you pictures of what goes on that causes the kinds of challenges and communities that we experience every day. I grew up in the rural part of Western North Carolina. I'm a person of Appalachian origin. And I know that whether I'm in downtown Nashville, I live on the edge of the urban area, or whether I am in the country, it doesn't matter where I am. The thing that we all need the most is hope and healing and to learn how to live in community. Now, I'm a fanatic about community. Back in the late 60s and early 70s, when I was in college, yes, I'm that old, I took a class on community in sociology because I thought it was the most important thing we could ever think about, how to live in community. And for those of you who are interested in some of the more academic stuff, I've put the sources of the content that I'm using in the handout that you'll get. But I want to talk about a couple of things that I learned way back in the dark ages. One is that community is an intentional process. It doesn't just happen. Even neighborhoods are intentional by virtue of the geography of them. However, what makes a neighborhood is not the address, but the people. And I'll give you my first example of how powerful neighborhood community building can be. When I moved into the home I'm in today in 2006, I had a house blessing, and I had everybody from, I had Buddhists, I had Muslims, I had Jewish people, I had Native American people, I had people from my own tradition. Culturally, I'm an Episcopalian, I'm much better as a Buddhist in a lot of ways. I had all the different spiritual leaders I could dig up to come and pray over this house, and I invited 150 people, including people from my neighborhood. What I was saying is, I'm here. My being here is intentional. I choose to know the people who live on either side of my house and up and down the street. I've graduated from becoming the fifth eldest on the street to now I'm the second eldest on the street. It's time to move. I got to find some younger people. But neighborhood is part of community, and it's intentional community that we're all seeking. The other thing I learned about intentional community from that class that I took with a guy named Pat Conover was that when we are choosing to give something up corporately in service of our community, we have a better chance of building an intentional community. This comes from the work I've done in religious communities in both the Episcopal and the Catholic Church, from studying the social hippie communities of my own era, that it's about what do I choose to give up to be able to focus on building what I want with my neighbors. So enough of that. So let me show you. You know as well as I do that when we say welcome, we don't always mean it. Sometimes we end up with barriers between us and the people around us that lead to, and lead historically as well as in our current times, to things like neighborhood decay. It's here in my own city, and it's growing as gentrification grows, and it's a challenge. We know that there are food deserts. There are food deserts here. There are food deserts wherever you are, and food pantries aren't enough. I'm just going to say it. Food pantries aren't enough. There are enough innovative food growing technologies that we can grow food almost anywhere if we can help people get on board and put those packages together. There are also medical deserts. Gratefully, technology, although it doesn't help my friends in the Navajo Nation much, where a lot of people still don't have electricity or cell phone signal, but there are also medical deserts. There are all kinds of deserts. We see a tremendous rise even now in homelessness. It doesn't always look as pretty as this. It doesn't even look as pretty as this, a fella having his birthday on the street. We have a tremendous issue, and I know in Minnesota, because of the weather, it's even more profound than it is in our fair states. Now, what contributes to all of this, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the people whose work I've studied over the years, one is we are all seeking human kindness, but what we end up with sometimes are damaged social relationships and damaged networks. These damaged networks make it more difficult for people to have the kind of life that we want for them and that they also want. We end up valuing destructive social norms, including violence, of which there seems to be no end. We end up with a collective feeling of powerlessness, which is not much fun. And we end up thinking there's nothing I can do, so I might as well do what I want to. And we end up with widespread numbness, fear, and shame. And here's the bad thing about numbness. When I go numb because I'm overwhelmed, not only can I not feel what's overwhelming me, I also cannot feel the pleasure and the happiness and the kindness and the joy that comes my way. And that is absolutely important when you're looking at hope and healing in community, because we need to help people be able to titrate. This is where what I call elastic emotions or self-regulation comes in. If I can't feel human kindness, how do I know when things are getting a little bit better for me? And that is a challenge that we all face. So the other thing that we wrestle with is intergenerational poverty, job loss, people leaving the area because they don't want to work in that area. My neighborhood is known for having an increasing number of immigrants and the higher level of people who sell cars and tire shops. And the complaint that my neighbors often have is, oh, there goes a business, reckon it'll be another tire shop. We don't know, we haven't mastered how to create increasing opportunities for the people who are new to Nashville, new to the United States, or the people who are here whose families have been trapped in generational poverty. Now, I want to give you a little bit of good news. When we help people learn the skills that they want to learn, we've seen this work in some of the Scandinavian countries who have literally decimated youth difficulties by asking the youth, what do you want to learn? And then helping the youth learn that. They begin to be able to build job-based opportunities for themselves and for other youth. And that is important to remember, that the lack of jobs we have is not because there's a lack of opportunity. It's because there's a lack of match between what do people want to learn to do and what do we help them learn to do. We are seeing some backlash from that in the lack of interest in four-year schools, which are reserved for the disciplines like nursing, education, pharmacy. For those you need 4 years of education. What we desperately need here in Nashville, we need people in skilled trades. We need people in programs that are apprenticeship programs that teach people HVAC, electrical work, plumbing, and other things. But we have to figure out how to match opportunity to interest in a different way. So educational and economic issues are also key in creating the kind of challenges in our communities. We see it with the youth who may not have a great deal of hope, who may be feeling that they don't have much of a future. We see it, what we hope to see is this. We want children from all different kinds of cultures and all different locations to recognize that there is a future and that they can have a piece of it. Now, let me tell you that the challenge we face with the intergenerational issues is that these children, as do all of us, every single person on this call, we all face the impact of what we have inherited from our ancestors. Intergenerational trauma or has an epigenetic marker that we all carry. For example, I carry the markers of the Korean War, World War II, the Great Depression, Reconstruction, the Civil War in terms of the impact on the families in the South. My people were not rich people. We were tenant farmers, and it was extremely difficult. I faced the challenges of Appalachia. I faced the inherited issues of all my ancestors, as do your patients, as do you, and as do the people who want to help people make things better. It will be long-term work. I just noticed a blip in our power. Let me assure you, if we should get cut off, I will sign right back in. And let me also set an expectation that it will take me about a day and a half to get the closed caption burned in, but I will get it burned in and we will have it. So these are some of the challenges we wrangle with. Now, here's what we're all here for. We all want to do something great. We want to see our communities healed. We want to see a decrease in the costs of healthcare in our communities. We want to see a decrease in the number of suicides, the level of alcohol and drug abuse. By the way, 90% of the people in treatment, comes from overwhelming experiences that think they're going to make them lose their minds or die or be badly injured, those things we call trauma. Nobody wants to talk about trauma because it stirs all of us up. You can get people to talk about the overwhelming experiences. When you're talking about structural violence, which we all wrestle with, one of the things that you're experiencing with structural violence is the epigenetic impact of generations growing up in environments where they could never get ahead, could never do anything that made a difference in their lives. If you want to bless someone, bless them by telling them that you hope and you desire strongly that the ceiling that they create will be the foundation for the next generation. If my ceiling, if I had children that I am able to create, is the foundation for my children, then my children will have come from poverty and a lack of education to fully educated people with master's degrees, able to create a world in which they are happy to participate. My children would inherit the ability to grow the food that they need and to process that food. They would inherit the skills that I inherited, some of from my ancestors and some that I have developed on my own. Doing something great is what hope and healing are about in communities. So there are these things called natural supports. Natural supports we look at are my neighbors. I can see them doing some construction on their home. They just waved at me, sorry. I've got neighbors. I know all of my neighbors. I know some better than others. Others I don't know at all, but I promise you there will be fruit taken to their homes in the next week because they've just moved in. Why not bread, pies, or cookies? Well, there might be someone there who has a dietary issue that makes those things impossible. We have, in these natural supports, we have the earth. For me, there's nothing more healing than the earth that sustains me and the earth that feeds me. The Hawaiians call it malama aina, caring for the earth because the earth cares for me. When I feed the earth, I enable it to grow the food that it feeds me. And so the earth and all that is part of the earth becomes a part of natural supports. The weather is a natural support, although sometimes it seems as if it's more of a natural enemy right now than a support. All of the earth and all that's in it is a natural support. My neighbors are my natural supports. My personal relationships are natural supports. I'm currently living in 2 states, and I find that my friendships in Tennessee and in South Carolina are equally important to me, even though they are long distance part of each month for each state. Your personal relationships are part of your natural supports. Also, we have spirituality and how it supports us. Whatever you believe and however you worship is critical to you and is part of your natural support system. Someone said to me a long time ago in the South, why do they always say, honey, do you have a church home? And they were just complaining because they actually were Jewish and they thought this was a very intrusive Christian evangelical question to answer. And so I explained that most immigration occurs from east to west, or used to in this country. And that because rural areas often had only their church communities as places where people gathered, it's really a question about, do you have someone who will bring you chicken soup when you are sick, who will be there when your people pass, who will help you find your way in a community that you may not know? And so learning how to decode some of these questions is important, even though it's our spirituality that helps us connect to greater meaning. Work is a natural support. Each of you has a community of colleagues that you work with, that you call on for guidance, for advice, to hold you up when a particularly difficult situation has occurred, and to whom you also extend that kind of support. Looking for natural supports is one of the most powerful things you can do. And I'm going to give you a hint. When you go out in the community, don't ask me who my natural supports are. My neighborhood doesn't talk like that. My neighborhood wants to know who your neighbors, who's got your back, who are your friends, who are your peeps. Ask people in the language that they understand. And if they happen to be people for whom English is a second language, make sure you know enough about that language to be able to ask them a question that's appropriate or take a translator. And finally, there's all kinds of natural supports in learning. Who are the elders? Whether they are indigenous or not indigenous, whether they are immigrants or whether their family's been here 5 or 6 generations, who are the elders? Who are the wisdom keepers? My wisdom keeper is a guy down the street about 5 houses around the corner who grew up here, whose parents grew up here, who is one of the most wonderful guys I know. He's not an ordinary kind of guy. He's in a mixed marriage with a guy that's a truck driver. And these 2 guys don't strike me as being people that would be ordinary to my neighborhood, but they are the wisdom keepers. And learning to love them and learning to let them love me has helped me know my neighborhood so much more powerfully. Then there are groups. How many social groups do you have? How many people are engaged in your world? How many people are there to help you wrestle with the stuff you've got to wrestle with? Neighbor, whether it has a you in it or not. Neighbor is one of the most important words. And if you go back and look around the Great Depression, you'll find that we paid attention to that skill called neighboring. With the new neighbors in my neighborhood, and this is part of how we build hope and healing here, a number of us will go to visit. We will say hello. We will introduce ourselves. We will give people a piece of paper with our names and the names of who lives in our home and our phone numbers. And we will say to them, call us if you need anything. We will check on the people around us when there's a storm. We will also let them know that whatever you do inside your home, we can't fuss about. But when you take it out in the yard, it becomes part of our world as well. So if you must argue and fuss, do it inside. And we let them know, because we know that whatever we set as normal is what becomes normal among the people who live here. So it's normal for my neighbors to call me when there's sickness. It's normal for me to call them when I notice their cars haven't moved a lot. It's normal for my neighbors to check on me when they don't see me outside at least once every day or maybe once a week. Neighbors, elders, wisdom keepers, the people you learn from, your colleagues, your faith community, your family, your personal relationships are all natural supports. And they can be a tremendous source of healing and of hope in your communities when you begin to identify them and help them recognize and work with each other. Now, what these folks do is really critical, these natural supports. And if you are using the handout, we're on the bottom of page 1, is they have a whole list of functions that they do. They help you build and maintain family strength. They help build and support the social fabric and the structure of the neighborhood. They create connections in the community. They create and enhance nature and its value. We share plants in my neighborhood. Yeah, our yards are all looking a lot alike in some ways, but we still share plants. My neighbors know that as long as they leave enough for me, they're welcome to harvest from my garden. Sometimes we have people who come who are homeless who live down on the creek that will glean the gardens. And as long as we set the right boundaries and say, as long as you leave something for someone else, you're welcome. Only once have I had my garden cleaned out completely, and I padlocked it for about a week until I could talk to all the people that might be gleaning and let them know everyone is welcome, but no one takes all, so that we share with each other. The other thing that they do is they build social capital, which supports this long-term intergenerational change. I've recently found out that the people who lived here before me were gardeners, and the people who lived here before them were gardeners. So I'm beginning to believe that even neighborhoods and environments continue a generational process that we may not be as conscious of as we could be. Now, there are a lot of things that we need for community healing, and there are a lot of tools. And I want to spend most of my time talking about rituals today, but I want to come back to this. My passion for community led me to this event today, right now. That passion's been going on for over 40 years, more like 50 years now. I sometimes forget how long. But the passion that you have for community and for building hope and healing in communities will wax and wane with your energy, with your life stage, and with your life cycle. One of the most important things that I can tell you is begin to build it in young people. Young people may or may not come back to their community to live, but there will be people who will come into the community to live. And so when we build this passion for community, for hope and healing in community among younger people, even if they are going to another neighborhood and planting it, it's a good thing. Do you know how many people moved into your neighborhood deliberately, even though they might have chosen to live somewhere else? Do you know the people who have a passion for community that you can call on? Do you know who the natural leaders are, even if they're people you may not find as desirable as others, because we all have bias and stigma? Do you know who they are? On page 2 in the handout, I want to point out the most important thing that you can do that I argue with a lot internally and externally. I can look at communities where I have commitments, and I can pretty much tell you what I think they need. Reminds me of the nurse in a class I was teaching where we were talking about a case of a woman who had ended up in the sex trade. And the nurse was terrified of all the possible health implications, but it was hard for her to see how much it was about income for that woman. So I'm going to take a couple of questions because I see some things popping up. I see Caprice, you have a question. If you'll type it in the chat, we'll be sure to tackle it. And Carrie, if you'll help me manage this, that would be great. So that we can have these so I can make sure I pay attention to them effectively.
Yeah, so far I haven't seen any specific questions related to the presentation, mostly just people
Okay, I see one.
saying that they're participating. And I will add the handout again in the chat. And if you still aren't able to get it, just shoot me an email and I can email it directly to you.
Perfect. And I'll also ping it here just in case, because you never know. Okay, there's a PDF that I've just added, and hopefully you can see that, and hopefully Carrie's got it too. I'll lope right on if that's okay. All right, so here's the thing. You're the couple things you're looking for in community with the people that you know. One is mutual aid. When my neighbors come racing down the hill with their arms up in the air and I can tell they're distressed, I'm going to reach out and open my arms and give them a hug. Miss Jane Petty did that a while back. I thought, oh Lord, here comes Jane Petty. And then when I reached out and embraced her, it turned out her sister had died. So when my brother-in-law died, guess where I went with my arms outstretched in need of a desperate hug? Mutual aid. And there's so much of that. How many of us have enough food we can share a meal with somebody up the hill? or down the hill? During the pandemic, did you leave food on somebody's doorstep? Mutual aid helps you begin to lay the foundation for building entrepreneurial centers in neighborhoods. It doesn't always have to come outside. The biggest error that I see in community building is when what's sometimes called a white savior comes in to try and rescue people and do things and build things for people. People must be involved in doing this with themselves, even though it would be slower and a lot more painstaking to find the people and to say, what do you need and how can I be of assistance? Now I say, as I said to my colleagues in Zambia last week, I can't travel to Africa. I don't have a lot of money to send you. And I don't have a huge social network that has an interest in your schools. Here's what I can do if it's what you need. I can help you create trauma-responsive schools and trauma-informed medical practices so that there's a stronger bond between the healthcare providers and the patients, and so that the healthcare providers get less burned out by the inevitable challenges they face in their work. I can help you with those things. This is what helping you with those things might benefit you in your community. If this would help you, and I'd encourage you to spend some time thinking about that and get back to me. A week later, I got a call saying, yes, what we'd like you to help us do is to learn how to think and live in these ways that you call trauma responsive, but we don't have mental health providers, and so we need you to help us learn how to look out for and with each other. I was ecstatic. This is exactly what I'm talking about, mutual aid. It makes a big difference. Placemaking. I can't tell you how many urban deserts I go into and I'm told, oh, that's a neighborhood you shouldn't go into. Oh, that's a neighborhood you shouldn't go into. Oh, you shouldn't walk there. I'm going, okay, let's see. Help me understand. I know what I look like. I know where I come from, and I know how old and tiny I am. I totally understand those are places that are dangerous. How can we help those people make place that reflects their culture and what they desire for each other as well as what they have? I have to tell you that when I sat down with the leaders of 4 different gangs that operate in my neighborhood and said, fellas, I know you have businesses to run, and I know you have things that you offer people that I can't and that no one else can. What can we do to help the people that we all share in common? I felt like I'd reached a pinnacle in my career. When you look at what people have in common instead of what people need that's different, and what people do that's different and divisive, you find that there's a lot more than you might think. So faith communities play a big role. It doesn't matter if they are Islamic or Christian or Jewish. It doesn't matter. What matters is that people of faith all have a need for hope. They need to know that they can make meaning and that they can see a future that will come that is different in their world. And this is important. Placemaking, in some ways, where you have faith communities, where there are buildings, you are seeing the beginning of placemaking. My question to you is, do you also have places where people can have rituals together that make it easier for them to recognize that no matter how they might worship, for example, they all want peace? Do you have programs that help people look at how we use power in our relationships with each other? No, it's not a pun. I wrestle with it because it's my surname. You know, do you look at these things? Do you see what we have in common that helps us work together for this? Community gardens. You're in Minneapolis. You have a really short growing season. However, you also have the ability to grow indoor gardens. You have the ability to set up spaces where yoga can become a part of community practice. Now, I chose this picture deliberately. Many people of color think that yoga is a white people's world. But I want you to go back and remember that yoga started in India. People of color started yogic practices, whether you do it as part of your spirituality or part of your exercise or to help you repair your brain. It's a tool that helps a lot of people. And here are a set of rituals. These are not in the handout that I'm going to tell you that will help you help everyone, that you can use anywhere, anytime. Singing. Where are the places where people sing? Faith communities, worship services, street corners. Ann Ellison heard me sing a while ago, which is part of my vocal warm-up that I do before I speak. Singing, dancing. Where do people dance? Not just clubs. Adults sometimes dance with little children when the children are happy. Dancing in the streets, dancing at festivals. These are all things that help people heal brains, heal from trauma. Singing, dancing, chanting. We hear chants at protests, at celebrations, in some faith communities. We hear it sometimes from parents who say, you've got to get up, you've got to get up, it's time to get up, you've got to get up. We hear a lot of the repetitive chanting that's not quite the same kind of thing we're really talking about. But you can see the difference it makes. To hear someone say, I love you or I bless you, day in and day out, becomes a long-term chant. Singing, dancing, chanting, drumming. Okay, you got to have a big enough neighborhood you can drum in where it's not going to freak the neighbors out, or get a permit and set up a drumming circle. Drumming is something that is indigenous to most people, but not to my people, that still helps people's brains heal from trauma. And finally, meditation. I didn't say medication, although that can help. Meditation, which is what the yogic practices help people do, is to settle and focus and go internal. These are all things that make a big difference in bringing hope and healing in community. All we're talking about is not only helping individuals, but helping groups of people re-regulate when most of us have lived in dysregulation all our lives. And bit by tiny bit, these practices, when we begin to help others develop them and implement them and cement them, help people heal, help communities heal. Now, some people say to me, yeah, but you're missing all those strong emotions that everybody's got that we've got to deal with. Yes, I am. We pretty much have that down pat, maybe more so than I'd like, with the violence, the expressions of anger that we see, the ways in which we rail against the night, we march, we protest. I'm talking about the things we've forgotten to do or that we didn't learn to do because we just didn't have the opportunity. When you grow up in a dysregulated environment because of structural violence, structural racism, or other causes, whether it's structural or situational, you forget how to do these things. These things I'm talking about are things that make a big difference. So the other thing that I want to talk to you about instilling in your communities are the restorative practices. This is an image of people planting on a vertical wall. How many spaces do you have where people could grow things vertically inside their interior? How many places do you have that could support interior gardening? Are there empty buildings that could be converted to gardening and farm production? Hydroponics, aquaponics, using artificial light or natural light. This doesn't appear to be a food garden, but it is still an example that shows you that gardening is possible internally. If the place I am in, South Carolina, does not allow me to grow things outside. It's an apartment. I live in a home in Nashville. So I have invested in a self-contained gardening system that will at least let me grow lettuce and radishes and maybe even cabbage and herbs. Now, it's not sweet potatoes and tomatoes and the things I grow outside, but there are ways in which food gardening and food production can be done inside buildings that helps you extend your gardening season and helps you reduce the food deserts in your neighborhoods. It takes innovation and it takes people willing to do that kind of work. And yes, I know we now have a situation where in many states marijuana is legal and hemp growing can be a problem for that. And there are ways to deal with that that are effective and that also bring hope. The place that we miss the most, I think, is restorative process. Now, restorative process is not just restorative justice where somebody wrongs me and the court does mediation and sets up a restorative mediation. We have to do things together. Restorative process calls on us to all think about circles and spirals and the way things work in nature, which is usually not real straight lines. It calls on us to recognize that through the restorative tools, we can develop a set of proactive ways of being that not only reduce harm in the future, but help us heal harm that has been done now. Sometimes it looks kind of hokey. Sometimes it looks kind of fun. Sometimes it looks like a lot of hard work. I know a story of a young man who broke into a relative's home and stole thousands of dollars of appliances and jewelry and financial instruments, who was facing the habitual offender law and would have gone to prison for 45 years. 45 years in prison is an awfully long time, and it would not have helped him learn a single thing about how to live in community. It would have deprived his children of a father. It would have deprived his wife of a husband. And the things that this man brought to the community that were good would have been totally missed. Restorative process called together the family member and the offender and a mediator, where the young man was required to develop community gardens and to teach people gardening. He was required to work at a job and pay back part of what he had stolen. And he was required to teach others how to do what he himself was learning. I'm pleased to say I still follow up with his family, and 2 of his 3 children are now gardening and doing restorative process in their family. And it makes a big difference. It's not something that necessarily should be taught by clinicians, because it is how life worked before we became industrialized and compartmentalized. There was also harsh justice that was meted out. That is true. But in many communities and in many cultures, especially indigenous ones, especially Afrocentric ones, the process was, you wrong me, you make reparations, and the matter is settled. It might be goats, it might be cows, it could be things from the village, but you wronged me, you correct this, you make it right, and we go forward. Money is often not the answer. Many times in intergenerational poverty, people do not learn how to use money in a way that is helpful. Now, I'm sounding like an imperialist, and in a way I am being imperialist. I'm not saying I know how to use money better than anybody else. Y'all, I can promise you that is not the truth. But I am saying that if you gave me $100,000, if I won the lottery, if winning the lottery was a form of reparation because I invested in it so much, which I don't, how many people do you know that win lotteries and end up in the same situation they were in before or worse? It's about helping children and adults learn how to make their dreams become reality, for which money is often necessary. But that is not the best solution for reparations in any circumstance, because we have all lost the ability, or many of us have lost the ability, to do with the money what we hope to achieve with our dreams. So when you involve the people who are at the effect of the issue, the communities themselves, the youth, the older people, the people in between, the disenfranchised groups, the groups that have privilege and entitlement of any sort, and begin to say, what do you want in your community? What do you need to help you heal? And respond to that, you are well on your way to developing hope and healing. It cannot be something where I come in and say, well, how can I fix you all today? Because the first thing that tells you is that I think you're broken. I'm just going to let that sit. And if I think you're broken, then I'm the one who determines how healed you are or how hopeful you are. And if that is the case, it is still me doing it to you and not with you. When we did the research at Georgetown on trauma-informed medical care, one of the challenges that we had to work with in the communication process we developed was, how do we help in an insurance-driven industry that's clearly metrics-driven? How do we help people build relationship with people that they may not know and may have limited contact with, so that they can build more compliance and more helpfulness in the relationship to reduce the risk for the providers and reduce the long-term healthcare risks for the people they were serving. And I remember one case was that we worked with one man who was a patient who was an immigrant from one of the African countries, who smoked and smoked and smoked. And his providers wanted him to quit smoking. They had done everything. They had told him what the dangers of smoking were. They had done a worksheet to show him how costly it was to him. They had shown him the section, cross-section of a lung that was polluted with smoke. Everything, all the fear tactics. What they had forgotten was that this man came from a community of people who sang. And when they finally decided to consider that maybe he was smoking because it helped him take deep breaths, maybe this was a matter of managing anxiety, and encouraged him to sing and encouraged him to form a community choir of people from his community back home, his smoking began to decrease. And then they could reward him and praise him and give him the recognition because he was helping carry his culture from his home country and his home village to the Washington, D.C. area. And he was building people who could sing and who could carry on the songs of his traditions. Now, to tell you how powerful this is, if you watch the documentary on the Gullah Geechee people and on Sierra Leone, in lower South Carolina, in the islands, there is a song that has been sung that somebody's grandparents knew that you could barely hear sung anywhere. But when they finally realized the genetic connection to Sierra Leone, one of the anthropologists went to see if they could find this song, and they took with them a recording of the person in South Carolina singing the song. Guess what? They found the song, and they found the people who sang it. And so now, across generations from the early slave trade to now, they found a song that connected them to their people. And celebrations are held every year singing the song that was found in South Carolina that belonged and came from Sierra Leone. So this is the kind of healing we're talking about when we help people find out who they are, where they come from, and find out what they would like to do and what they want to know. That same group is now teaching youngsters who are of Gullah Geechee origin in South Carolina to become cultural tour guides. And so instead of enfranchising non-native people, they are enfranchising native people to do the work that the native people do best because it is their culture. These are the kinds of things I'm talking about. Now I'm going to lope on to rituals, because I think rituals are so very powerful. What is this? This is a memory ceremony at a Buddhist temple where they burn incense to honor the people who have passed before. You may not have many Buddhists where you live, but if you grew up in the Christian community, you probably know about the smoke of the incense rising up like prayers to God's nostrils. Do we have memorial fires? Well, we have memorial candlelight services. Do we have festivals? Do we have parties? How is tagging and graffiti a form of ritual that can help build community? This is a message. I don't know what it means, but this is the art of many urban youth. How can we celebrate it, and how can we foster it in ways that reduce it and get it out of the world of criminal activity into the world of method and communication? I just want to sit on this because it's such a gorgeous picture. In the handout, if you've gotten it, one of the things you'll find is that there's a whole list beginning on page 3. Some of these items, like always accessible, social media is a big thing. You will need to pay attention to who has access to a smartphone, who has access to internet, how internet enabled are your neighborhoods, are the people that you're serving. Helping people get internet access and helping people get connected, although it can really reduce personal relationships, is also one way to continue making information available. If you use a hashtag like always accessible, you can easily let people know where there are curb cuts, where there are buildings that are easily accessible, where there are buildings that are not very accessible, where there are buildings with hearing amplification, when people do burned-in closed captioning so that the words are always there and not dependent on whether or not the technology works. You can help people find out what's accessible where and how. This is good information to build. Don't promote the information about what's not accessible. I promise you, you will get grumbling galore. And we have enough grumbling to go around. What about AMA nights? That's not American Medical Association. It's not against medical advice. It's Ask Me Anything. And in about 5 minutes, I'm going to let you guys ask me anything. It'll be an AMA moment. You can set those up as regular occurrences where leaders come together and gather. Our local council person has a coffee with Jenny every 3 weeks at the local coffee house. Candlelight nights. Candlelight night is a hashtag you can use. Make up your own when you're going to have a vigil honoring in someone's honor for a wisdom keeper or an elder, or when you're doing a memorial to honor someone and remember things that have happened that have gone before. Candlelight nights, you can do lantern nights, you can do all kinds of things that are memory makers. Feedback Fridays, when we encourage open feedback and receive it. Yes, thank you, I appreciate that. All feedback has meaning. Every piece of feedback you can give and receive makes a big difference to people. Setting up a regular feedback time. Feedback Friday, I went for alliteration. Friday fun. Maybe you have a reading club. Reading is one of the best ways to begin to build hope and healing in communities. Reading with children, reading with older people, so that you begin to do the reading, and then maybe you have staff, volunteers, or maybe all the adults come together and talk about some really funny, silly parts of a book they were reading. Don't talk about the gruesome stuff. We've got enough of that. We need to soothe instead of excite the brain most often. Good grief. I think there might be a group called Good Grief, but helping people who are grieving. They don't need to be set up and called out and separated. We all need to grieve. We might need to grieve what we have lost in our community. We might need to grieve a lost opportunity. We might need to grieve a lost pet. But to look at losses and begin to consider them as normal and integrate them into our daily world through loss and memory. Have you all ever noticed the number of roadside memorials there are? Crosses on the side of the road, little memorials to people who've died in wrecks. We could memorialize where people have died, and we can also memorialize where people have done great things. On this corner, Jacob stood up to Renaud and told Renaud he couldn't get away with being mean in his community. Anything you can do to memorialize the good things, the standing up things, the brave things, the courageous things will help. Love blossoms. That image I showed you of the people planting the plants is one of my favorite projects called Love Blossoms, where we give people plants to commemorate special events, and we help them grow them. Here's a picture of lanterns. Lanterns in the Buddhist tradition are how we celebrate people who've gone on before us. It's easy to build lanterns and launch them on water. Please don't use balloons. They hurt the wildlife. Please don't use plastic. It hurts the wildlife. But simple beeswax candles and handmade lanterns. And those lanterns, one of the things some people do is they write stories about or letters to the people they're memorializing on the paper on those lanterns. So it begins to be a beautiful way to celebrate that. Candlelight vigils, I've already talked about a little bit. You can also do a weekly safety stroll in your neighborhood on your block. Call out to people, say hello to them. I know winter's coming. There are all kinds of things you can do with winter that I can't do here in Nashville because we don't have much of that season, certainly compared to you all. But using light cuts across every major faith tradition as a sign of hope. Please use unscented things because you may have someone who has asthma for whom an artificial scent, such as a Yankee candle or a scented candle, might promote life-threatening asthma. This is one of the most peculiar rituals I've ever seen. How many of y'all have ever seen tennis shoes thrown across some form of power line or telephone line? I don't know what it means, but I assure you someone made it into a ritual. And let me talk about what that means, because I want you to understand that ritual has elements to it. A ritual, first of all, involves what am I going to be? What is the purpose of this ritual? When I know the purpose of the ritual, is it to celebrate? Is it to gather together? Is it to memorialize? What is it to remember? What will it help me focus? The purpose of the ritual will help you design the ritual that you need to have. For example, if you have a drive home, maybe a 30-minute, 45-minute drive home, that may be your transition ritual. When I'm on a transition ritual driving, I'm going to be listening to a certain radio station. I'm going to be listening to specific songs, and I'm going to be purging my mind of what I've done before I started that drive. You can find out what these shoes are over the wire for. Somebody can tell us, but I didn't research it because that's a mystery for you all. When you decide what the purpose of the ritual is, then you're looking at the elements of the ritual. It has an opening, it has contents, and it has a closing. The contents are where you decide how many people will I involve to help with this ritual. Is this, me doing it for myself, or is it me doing it with others? Most important is to celebrate the rituals that you have and to make laughter and love and friendship part of this challenge. Whatever kind of light you use, whatever your nighttime is, mending hearts is what we're about. And that's how we help people bring hope and healing back into communities, is through our own intentional activities in our community and by finding out what people need and how we can help them develop and provide that. Do it with people, not for people, and the most amazing thing happens. Hope blossoms everywhere. Now, what are your questions? How can I be of service to you?
Just a reminder to use the chat if you have any questions you would like to ask of Elizabeth.
What is the first step in reaching out to your neighbors? Well, the first thing I do is I make up a social card, which is a thing from the past. And I go and I peck on the door and I say, hey, I've been here a long time and I haven't met you. And I am so sorry that I haven't met you, but I wanted to meet you. I'm Elizabeth. I live next door in the house with a big garden behind it. And I just wanted to let you know, if you need anything, I'm here. That's all. It's a simple one. Or make a little block party. Walk around your neighbors and say, hey, I'm having a get together in the backyard, going to do burgers and dogs. If you're a vegetarian, we're probably going to have some grilled tofu. Please come. It'll be alcohol free. What else? You're so welcome, Amy.
There was another one that said, the question was, can you say more about the wisdom keepers?
Oh, yes. Now, see, I live on a short street and I had wisdom keepers. Miss Jane Petty, who's still alive, is a wisdom keeper. Miss Jill Chapman, who's passed in March, is a wisdom keeper. And Miss Kitty McKee was a wisdom keeper. And now I'm considered one of the wisdom keepers. On my street, the wisdom keeping role is I know who lived where before, and I know what the history of my street is. I can tell you that the house that I'm looking at out my window has been owned by a fellow who played guitar for Shania Twain, and then a young medical student and her husband bought it. And they moved in while she was in her residency. And now they lent it to a group from Australia. And now it's been bought by a Latino family. And they are painters and electricians. Do you know that about your neighbors? That's the wisdom keeping. The other form of wisdom keeping is a wisdom keeping of tradition and nature and spirit. Our tradition among a tight-knit group of houses on my street is that we will welcome everyone until they become violent or violate certain norms. The guy that was having cars hold up his driveway on tow trucks every day, we had a talk with him and sent him to codes. You can't do that here. So wisdom keeping is not only of local knowledge, It is also of deep knowledge. For example, we had a woman who lived here for a while who was a curandera. She knew herbs and roots and berries. We had another woman who was an absolute prayer warrior in her tradition. We know the people who hold the wisdom of the ages, whether it's about the earth or spirituality or neighbors or cooking or canning or how to survive certain experiences. You all are getting ready to go back to the places you've been. I want to tell you that I bless you with all the light and love and blessings of all that is, that keeps you happy, fills you up, keeps you full, stirs your soul, and helps you bring hope and healing wherever you are at all times in all ways. And I thank you, Anne, for inviting me to be here.
Well, it's one of the smartest things I've done in a long time is inviting you to be with us. And I have to say, I learn every time I listen to you, Elizabeth. So thank you for being with us. Carrie, you want to close us out?
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. Everyone, I just dropped in the chat the link for the feedback or the evaluation. So I'll send it out in my email recap as well, but it is in the chat now too. If you like to cross things off your list right away, it's there for you. Let's see. Okay, so just a reminder, later on, I will be emailing out the CEU certificate, that link to that evaluation, the handout, and then the link to the recording. I think I might send that out right away, but then I'll also send out the closed caption one, just because I know people are excited to see it. And then we look forward to seeing all of you at our next and final session of our 2022 Feeding Hope series on November 15th. Featuring our very own Sandy McGurran, who couldn't be with us today, but she's also been the one who's helped us to plan this series. And she's going to give a brand new presentation called Pause and Rise Up. And so information about that will be coming out soon. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. And again, thank you, Elizabeth.
You're so welcome.
Bye.
Bye-bye.